that cover us, the rains that fall. The world is one world, the thoughts we think affect us all. The way we build our attitudes with love or hate we make a bridge or wall. The world is one world, its ways of love affect us all. The way we spend, the way we share, who are the rich or poor, who stand or fall. The world is one world, just like a ship that bears us all, where fear and greed make many holes, but where our hearts can hear a different call.
Good morning. And good morning to all of you in virtual land. It is great to be together and to worship. We ring the bell to begin our worship 3 times. The first is to call us into covenant to renew and rebuild our relationships. And we start by invoking and inviting the presence of this land's forebearers, those to whom we did wrong and with whom trust needs repair. We occupy the unceded land of the Muwekma tribe of the Ohlone people. The second bell calls us into relationship with ourselves and one another, that we open our hearts to the wisdom of the diverse array of people and perspectives and practices, that we learn to invite an ever-widening circle of compassion and commitment until we are all beloved to one another. And the third bell calls us into relationship with our children and our children's children out to the 7th generation, helping us to realize that what we do now or what we fail to do will be felt by those who come after us.
Good morning. I started college in the early 1970s. It was a time of youth activism and idealism. I joined our college political science society in a bus trip to Mississippi to encourage voting and to be a poll watcher in the area where Medgar Evers had been killed a few years before. I was too young and excited to think about the danger we were in, but I remember that my parents were very worried. We students felt that we were changing things so that free and fair elections would be available to everyone. Of course, I believed at the time that voter rights and individual rights would move endlessly forward to a better place. It was a wonderful experience. Years later, in the fall of 2018, I listened to the people of Georgia talk about their experiences with the gubernatorial election and the 7th congressional races. I saw a young Vietnamese woman whose parents had fled tyranny in their home country describe being turned down at the polls in her first US election because there was a hyphen in the name on her driver's license that did not appear in the name that was listed at the polls. She talked with friends all over the district who'd been turned down to vote for similar reasons. I listened to a middle-aged Black woman describe how she took a few hours off from work and from caring for her child to vote. She stood in line for hours and was refused to vote because she was in the wrong polling place, only to have this experience repeat itself multiple times throughout the day and evening as she stood in lines again and again trying to vote. There were 87,000 people in Georgia who registered but were not allowed to vote. Absentee ballots were requested and never received. People waited in long, long lines for many hours to vote, and then were turned down because of technicalities or because they had been removed from voting rosters without their knowledge. A disproportionate number of these people were young voters or people of color. It was very painful to see people denied the right to vote again. My heart broke, but this time I wanted it to be different from the last time my heart broke for our democracy. November 9th, 2016, I awakened to find that the earth had shifted. I felt that the presidential election had resulted in the end of civility, empathy, and democracy. My heart broke, but not neatly. It broke into a million little pieces. I turned off the news, newspaper apps, and news feeds. I sat in my room for hours and lost myself in a novel about a different time and a different place. I got dinner and I did the laundry, but in the mechanical way that one does things when part of the brain has been disconnected from the body. I listened repeatedly to Albert King's "I'll Play the Blues for You," his guitar strummed upside down and backwards. I didn't want to talk about it. But eventually I did talk about it with friends and loved ones, and together we gradually mended our hearts. This time after the Georgia race, I put my efforts into helping young people register to vote. Members of our congregation helped Youth Voter Movement register over 2,000 high school students in 2018, 2019. We wrote over 7,000 letters in 2019 to encourage people to vote. Others made sandwiches for a shelter, supported our asylum seeker, encouraged Fremont City Council to support the homeless, or found other ways to make a difference to our community and our democracy. We didn't let our disappointments defeat us and make us bitter. We used them to be more determined and more caring, and to do our best to be the best people we could be and help bend the arc of the universe toward justice. Thank you. Please join with me in reciting these words which call us together as a community and with Unitarian Universalists all across the globe. We light this chalice to remind ourselves to treat all people kindly, to take good care of the earth because it is our home, to live lives full of goodness and love because that is how we will become the best people we can be.
Good morning. Welcome to Mission Peak Unitarian Universalist Congregation. My name is Colleen Arnold. My pronouns are she, her, or they, and I'm a member of the board. We're so glad you joined us this morning. Unitarian Universalism is a radically inclusive, non-doctrinal, non-dogmatic, open-minded, and open-hearted faith. We are people who are all coming at truth from different paths. We gather together across different identities, experiences, and beliefs to affirm and promote the inherent worth of every person. Together, we see our job is to love the hate out of this world, heal the hurt in ourselves and one another, and be the change we'd like to see in the world. We use chat in Zoom or our book near the welcome table to share joys and concerns, which are personal milestones of importance, which will be read aloud during the service. Maybe you're here for the first time. We've been reaching out and asking people to bring their friends because we think the world, especially now, needs some friendly places to gather and find encouragement and hope. We have social hour after the service where we get to visit with one another in breakout rooms or on the patio. The worship host will give you more information about this immediately after the service. In the meantime, we put a link to our weekly newsletter in the chat so you can all see the events coming up. We encourage you to join anything that speaks to you. We also put our welcome email, welcome@mpuuc.org, to request a newsletter or other information be sent to you. There's a few things we'd like to call your attention to. Attendees should be masked inside and outside of Cole Hall during the service, preferably with N95 or KN95 masks. We have such masks available at the welcome table in the back. Please help yourself. Eating and drinking are only allowed outside. The boutique and auction, our boutique, will be held here in Cole Hall on November 5th. We could still use a few volunteers. We're a little short on volunteers for that day. So if you're able to give us an hour, 2 hours, the whole morning, that would be fabulous. We could use all the help we can get. In the links to sign up to help so that we can give you a shift or you can tell us when you can do it is in the week on the peak. The other thing that I want to call your attention to is that we now have 6 brand new air filters along Cole Hall. Very exciting, very big, very new and lovely. And they are cleaning our air several times an hour, many times an hour, I think, so that we don't have to open the doors during the winter time, so that it can be a little bit warmer in here when you're here in person. There's more information on the bulletin board to your left and in this week on the Peak. Please silence your electronic devices. If you hear or see something in this morning's service that inspires you or makes you laugh or brings you hope, please tweet it or share it on social media or just tell a friend. We are trying to start a wave of love and justice with every gathering. Thank you for joining us.
We sing now together our song of thanksgiving, rejoicing in goods which the ages have wrought, for life that enfolds us and helps and heals and holds us, and leads beyond the goals which our forebears once sought. We sing of the freedoms which martyrs and heroes have won by their labor, their sorrow, their pain. Though pressed to defending our amber hopes defending, their death becomes a triumph. They died not in vain. We sing of the prophets, the teachers, the dreamers, designers, creators, and workers, and seers, our own lives expanding, our gratitude commanding. Their deeds have made immortal their days and their years. We sing of community now in the making, in every far continent, region, and land, with those of all races, all times and names and places. We pledge ourselves in covenant firmly to stand.
Do you know who this guy is? Would you let him run your school?
Obviously not.
We take up a collection on Sundays for the simple reason that our purpose in gathering is for more than ourselves. We want to make sure that the ministries that we need, the ones that infuse worth and dignity into our children, our youth, our programs of learning and leadership, and our ministries of anti-oppression, and our work in the larger world are in place to meet the needs of others. We hope you will make a contribution toward these worthy causes by mailing your checks to Mission Peak UU Congregation at the address on the screen. You can also use the bill pay option in your online banking, or drop a check into Mission Peak mail slot, or pay online with a credit card or debit card. Thank you for supporting and sustaining the efforts of our members, friends, and staff. Your contributions make loving and learning and leadership more possible.
One of the things that allows us to find hope and meaning in our lives, especially in the challenging moments, is the love and the support that we show one another when we greet one another with open hearts. If you have a joy or a sorrow that by sharing with this community might bring some hope or resilience, we invite you, if you are online with us, to share it briefly in the chat, or if you're in person, to write it in the book. And we will share these so that the whole community can carry our joys and sorrows together. If your joy or sorrow is more personal or tender and you would like a conversation, please email me or Reverend Barbara and we will reach out to you. If you would like to drop a stone in our stone garden, we invite you to do that virtually, or you can come up during the music and drop a stone and hold that care in your heart. These are the joys and sorrows that are in our heart this week. And from Graham, who we all owe a great debt of gratitude for bringing in all of these air filters, because it is quite warm and toasty and clean in here. A great joy and appreciation to Kathy Bain, who was just and is always pretty brilliant in sharing her passions with us, especially around democracy and voting, and wishes for safe travel as she is on the road this weekend. A heartfelt appreciation for our musicians, for Nudie Van Hoven and Paul, who helped do our hymn, and especially to Joanne Schreiner, who is incredibly talented and gracious and responds to playing piano medleys on demand. And thank you to all of the people who helped to put together this service, to Celeste, our greeter extraordinaire, to Don, who does all the flowers, and to just all of you who bring this great spirit into this room. For all of these joys and sorrows and those still too tender to escape the silent sanctuary of our hearts, may we keep our hearts broken open, that we have open arms, open minds, and open doors. Amen. Please join with me in the spirit of this reflection. This morning's reflection is a poem from Mary Oliver. It is called Lead. Here is a story to break your heart. Are you willing? This winter, the loons came to our harbor and died one by one, of nothing we could see. A friend told me of one on the shore that lifted its head and opened its elegant beak and cried out in the long, sweet savoring of its life, which, if you have ever heard it, you know is a sacred thing, and for which, if you have not heard it, you had better hurry to where they still sing. And believe me, tell no one exactly where that is. The next morning, this loon, speckled and iridescent, and with a plan to fly home to some hidden lake, was dead on the shore. I tell you this to break your heart, by which I mean only that it break open and never close again to the rest of the world.
Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Mama and Papa are fighting like snakes. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Baby is a-crying like her heart will break. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Neighbors lock their doors, build their fences so high. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Don't see what's to discover on the other side. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Borders round countries, borders round the skies. Open the window, let the dove fly in. The only border close to you is the border round your mind. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Oh, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Some people have money, some people have none. Open the window, let the dove fly in. What's the use of your money if your heart's gone numb? Open the window, let the dove fly in. This big old world's in a great big mess. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Let's open the window, find some peace and rest. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. 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 Open the window, let the dove fly in.
Who arranged the pictures for that? I did that. Very nice. Thank you. That opportunity, by the way, is open to anybody who would like to do that. I don't mean to hog that. I don't think people want Oh, Jay asked who did the pictures to that video, and I said that I did that, but I don't need to hog that opportunity. It's a good thing to do. It is. Graham does it. It's a lovely thing. Here are some stories to break your heart. Are you willing? Ben died for reasons he was powerless to prevent. He had no water. It got too hot. It's a simple story, but one that left me spinning. Let me explain. Ben was my pet mouse when I was 10 years old. My first endeavor into pet ownership. He was my pet, my responsibility, and it took the better part of a year to win the trust of my mother to allow me to care for a pet. I had honestly been a C student at best, caring even for myself. But for the first 4 months of Ben's life, it went okay. And in that 4 months, the care that I gave turned to love. But then came Memorial Day weekend. Our family was going camping, and in all the frenzied excitement of my packing, I forgot to clean Ben's cage and leave food and water. About 40 minutes after we drove away, and while we were in the car, I suddenly remembered, and I thought about saying something, but fearing blame and appearing irresponsible, I stayed silent. I spun a story in my head about how I could be absolved of any crimes, and I tried to push it out of my mind. But the next morning it was back again, and I thought of asking my mom if we could phone home to our neighbors, an older conservative couple who we didn't really relate to much. They had a key, maybe they could come over and give Ben water, but I just kept spinning stories to justify my silence. That silence became my secret that haunted me the entire weekend, especially as temperatures climbed to over 100 degrees. When we got home, I raced back to our bedroom to Ben's cage, and I reached in to pick him up, and he was still, like my heart, like the secret I had kept. I held him for a few minutes, unmoving in my hands, and I was mortified. And then I put him back in the cage and sat there as still as Ben. And as I sat, the secret that I had kept dropped from my mind to my heart and broke it, and bringing the tears that I had held back. And that was how my mother found me. I admit that this is a rather odd story to begin a sermon on politics and democracy. So let me offer my version of Politics and Democracy 101. Politics and democracy is whatever story we tell that accounts for power and decision-making in the system we live in. It talks about who holds power and how that power is shared or not with those who have less power. It talks about interdependence and mutuality, or it talks about domination and control. It explains the relationship and the responsibility shared by everybody in the system. By the end of the story, you should know the priority of everyone's needs in the system, as well as the basic accounting of who lives and who dies. You can spin this story however you want, and history is filled with countless variations on that. But every so often, something will happen where the story takes a turn that demands some accounting, where everything becomes still, and the story we had been telling ourselves in our head drops down to our heart. It is the call of the loon in the harbor explaining his plan of flying home that never happens. So here is where I ask you, who here has been worried about the state of democracy lately? Who has felt the temperature of fascism rise in our country? And who is worried about the story that our caretakers of democracy have been spinning as they talk to us? Have you been worried that we have left democracy out on its own without enough water to survive? And what did you make of the January 6, 2021 debacle at the Capitol when it was overrun by armed insurrectionists? When the crowds called for the hanging of the Vice President of the United States and their attempt to stop the electoral count was barely thwarted? And what about the investigations that revealed extensive efforts to establish alternate electors, pressure secretaries of state and election officials to find votes, to pronounce the election results corrupt without proof? And what about rampant gerrymandering or the obstacles designed to deny certain people's rights to vote? And then there's the whole thing about Russian interference. It's been widely confirmed by US intelligence that the 2016 election was impacted by Russian hackers breaking into the Democratic campaign's programs, gaining control of social media algorithms, manipulating gullible Americans by creating bots to spread propaganda. Most intelligence sources see this as a strategy less about electing a specific candidate to office and more about making it harder for anyone who is elected to govern by undermining trust in the democracy and increasing polarization among the citizenry. And finally, what do you think about money's influence in democracy? Big money. Dark money, the increasing disparity in wealth and the vanishing middle class. And what about Supreme Court's 2010 decision passing Citizens United, giving corporations the vote and turning influence into a measure of wealth? Or the Supreme Court's 2014 decision following that, ruling that corporations don't even need to reveal their identity when donating to political endeavors. Combine all of this with candidates who are allowed to shout fake news to blur the line between fact and fiction, and it's easy for ordinary citizens to feel that we're all just in a waiting room getting a bleak prognosis about the health of democracy. We wonder whether our voices will count or if there is any way to beat big money. But Bill Moyer, journalist, offers a response worth considering. He says, quote, "The only antidote to the power of organized money is the power of organized people." And I would add to that, the key to organizing people is to speak heart to heart. And even more than that, to speak broken heart to broken heart. The Politics of the Brokenhearted, the title for today's sermon, is a phrase I borrowed from the book Healing the Heart of Democracy. That book was written by teacher and theologian and activist and writer Parker Palmer, who at the age of 65 found himself sliding into a significant depression in the aftermath of 9/11. He says, quote, "Wounded and overwhelmed by fear, we soon went to war against a country that had no direct connection to the attacks. Many Americans seemed willing to abandon their constitutional rights to privacy along with our international treaty obligations. Some Americans, including elected officials, were also quick to accuse protesters and dissenters of being unpatriotic or worse, fragmenting the civic community on which our democracy depends," end quote. Parker Palmer was no stranger to democracy's peril. He had lived through McCarthyism, the pushback to civil rights, the political assassinations of the 60s, through Vietnam, the Pentagon Papers, Watergate, and the electoral debacle of 2000. He had been following the widening gap of income inequality and the erosion of the middle class and the growing oligarchy of wealth determined to trump the will of the people. Palmer wrote the Healing the Heart of Democracy in 2010, 5 years before Trump's political rise, and yet he more than accurately predicted it. In particular, he foresaw the strategic demonization of the other, both within and beyond our borders. He saw the rise in us versus them language, and he recognized the manipulative use of fear to pit people against one another and to prevent us from saying the one phrase that all despotic leaders fear, which is "we the people." What we've been saying is like politicians returning from vacation to find that their mouse has died from lack of water and then blaming the mouse. Pretty soon, we all feel as powerless as the mouse. How can we fail to understand that our national greatness is more than how successful the strong can be, Parker laments. It is also about how well we support the weak. Palmer saw our inability to recognize pain and share power as a great detriment, and that led him deeper into depression. But as poet Theodore Rothke writes, in a dark time, the eye begins to see truly. Palmer slowly came back to life, gaining new clarity about himself. And one of the things that helped was a book that he had read that talked about the connection between heartbreak and depression. That book was called Lincoln's Melancholy by Joshua Schenck. And it talked about the episodes of depression, what was then at the time called melancholy, that were so familiar to President Abraham Lincoln long before and all through the Civil War. In his early 20s, the melancholy that Lincoln experienced was so severe that neighbors occasionally took him in for fear that he might take his own life. But over time, Lincoln refused to either turn away from his darkness or be consumed by it. Even after gaining easy access to an array of popular therapies at the time, such as opium or the water cure or visiting a mesmerist, he continued to see those things as strategies of numbing or evading the inner darkness, which had a wisdom that he needed to acknowledge and embrace and integrate. Lincoln instead turned to poetry and humor for his therapy. Poetry to reflect deeply on the human condition, and humor to keep everything in perspective. The humor he employed incredibly artfully, which he did in a self-effacing way that won over his enemies. For instance, in the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates, when Douglas accused Lincoln of being two-faced, Lincoln replied, referencing his own homeliness, "Honestly, if I were two-faced, would I be showing you this one?" It was this deep commitment to integrate darkness and light that led Lincoln to refuse the splitting of the North and South into good guys and bad guys, a split that might have taken us closer to the national version of suicide. Indeed, it was his second inaugural address, delivered a month before the end of the Civil War, that Lincoln appealed for malice toward none and charity for all. It was an appeal to heal and integrate a nation even more deeply divided than we are today. Lincoln well understood that the greatest threat to democracy would never be from outside marauders. Destruction of the magnitude needed to dismantle this country would need to be an inside job. In January 1838, at just 28 years old, and the Civil War still 23 years off, a prescient young Lincoln addressed the Young Men's Lyceum of Springfield, Illinois, on a talk entitled "The Perpetuation of Our Political Institutions." And exhorting his audience to understand the responsibility to protect American democracy against its enemies, he said this: "At what point shall we expect the approach of danger? Shall we expect some transatlantic military giant to step across the ocean and crush us at a blow? Never. The armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined could not by force take a drink from the Ohio or make a track on the Blue Ridge. At what point, then, is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and its finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. End quote. The efficacy of any political body, whether community or country, rests in the level of cohesion of its neighbors making up that body. Our ability to recognize what binds us together one with another and retain resilience is also what allows us to see from new perspectives and broaden our collective vision. Palmer recognized this necessary cohesion and that it comes not by thinking alike, but by loving alike. Indeed, we weaken cohesion whenever we spin someone else's story or reduce them to some maniacal plot. When we intellectualize them, we turn them into an academic idea and manipulate them. He points to George Carlin's observation of how we slowly turned away from people's pain from war by intellectualizing it. This is Carlin, quoted from the book. There's a condition in combat, most people know about it. It's when a soldier's nervous system has been stressed to its absolute max, can't take any more input. The nervous system has either snapped or is about to snap. In World War I, that condition was called shell shock. Simple, honest, direct language. 2 syllables, shell shock. Almost sounds like the guns themselves. By World War II, the name had morphed into battle fatigue. 4 syllables now, takes a little bit longer to say, doesn't seem to hurt as much. Then came the Korean War, and the condition became known as operational exhaustion. The humanity has been completely squeezed out of the phrase. It sounds like something that might happen to your car. Then came Vietnam, and we all know what it's been called ever since: post-traumatic stress disorder. Still 8 syllables, but we've added a hyphen. And the pain is completely buried beneath the jargon. So buried, I might add, that we lose our ability to see our neighbor as ourselves. Through the years, I've wondered about the ways that we reduce or diminish the heartbreak that we see and feel. Parker Palmer includes Carlin's message in the book to point out something important that Carlin missed. An important precursor to shell shock was known in the Civil War, which Lincoln presided over. There, traumatized combatants were known for a condition they called soldier's heart. These are all stories to break your heart. Are you willing? Healing the Heart of Democracy is a book about soldier's heart. Parker considers the heart that we need in politics to be not merely one that wields emotions. He points out that the English word heart comes from the Latin cor, referring not simply to emotion, but to the core of the self, where all of our ways of knowing are converging and integrating: intellectual, emotional, sensory, intuitive, imaginative, experiential, all converge. The heart is where we integrate truth into our bones. Core is also the Latin root from which we get the word courage, the ability to act on the truth that we know. Working through the tension of light and darkness inside us usually helps us to see with less judgment and intellectualizing the light and the darkness within those around us. And integrating those parts into a cohesive whole is key to managing a wholehearted way of working together. It may help us to know that there are two ways our heart can break. The first is what many commonly think of, the heart shattering into a million pieces, which Kathy talked about in her call to worship. When the isolation and the pain that follows a tragic event feels overwhelming, and when we can't become certain that people will understand or care about our situation, this makes our heart fragile and brittle. Brittle and fragile hearts can't hold very much. Love that comes to them is quickly devoured like they are starving for it. And pain and anger that comes to them quickly gets passed on to others. But the second way our heart breaks is when our heart is supple. When the unthinkable happens and the spin we put on our story becomes still. When we hear the loon crying out, or we hold our still pet in our arms, our story drops from our head to our heart and breaks it open. If you've ever had such moments, please listen. Don't turn away. I tell you this to break your heart, by which I mean that it break open and never close again. To live with a broken heart is a precious thing because it is broken-hearted people who have room. And the really big things in life that we need to consider need room. I'm talking about neighbors and community and mutuality and democracy and justice and peace and love. We can fill our hearts with all kinds of things. It is the heart, though, that compels people to act. And it can compel people to act for evil as well as for good. Remember, it was ordinary Germans heartbroken by defeat in World War I and by the economic failures and cultural humiliations that came with the Weimar Republic, who put Hitler in power as he promised to restore their lost sense of national greatness. Just like it was the heartbroken grandmothers of the disappeared in Chile and Argentina who brought down murderous tyrants by exposing their cruelty and demanding justice through public demonstrations. We have a choice of what to do and how to fill our heart. Organized people are far more resilient, resourceful, and powerful than organized money or organized politicians. Real democracy only works when people organize. And that kind of organization only happens when we have room for one another, when we are able to integrate light and dark, and when we see each other from broken, open hearts. I pray that whatever we do in this upcoming election, and I hope you are involved, and I hope that you take seriously the responsibilities of this time, that you vote, that you encourage others to vote, that you watch the process, and that even though you may have your mind made up, open your mind and open your heart to the stories of others and make room for them. For that is the only way that democracy can work and the only way that minds can change to be filled with hope and promise. May it be so. Amen. And blessed be.
Each secret thought is known to thee, my whole life's path, whate'er it be, and I am yours, I rest in you. Oh, wondrous love, rest in me too, rest in me too. The ends of earth stretch far and wide, through dark and sea and open sky, and I am yours, I rest in you. Oh, wondrous love, rest in me too, rest in me too. The lone wild bird in lofty flight is still with you, nor leaves your sight, and I am yours, I rest in you. Oh, wondrous love, rest in me too.
Please join with me in reciting these words to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Friends, one hand on your hearts, the other reaching out to a heart whole world. May we be willing and be so courageous to let our heart break open and to invite those from a different way of life into our heart. It is only when we see one another's pain and their promise that our vision widens and the possibility and potential that is ours is realized. Let us do that with care and compassion, and let us begin that today. Amen.